Welcome to Chit Chat History, where I can finally talk about history without being graded for it. This chat is going to be all about queens, specifically how these queens came to be queens at all. So to set us up, let's discuss the type of queens we see throughout history. There are three types of queens: Queen Consorts, Queen Regents, and Queen Regnants. First up, we have Queen Consorts. These are queens that are married to the king. They have no power, they've not inherited the crown, and they do not have royal blood, besides the incest and the ones who are married to each other. So a good example of a queen consort would be any of King Henry VIII's wives. Once the king dies, they do not inherit the throne. They actually become a queen dowager, which basically just means the old king's widow. Next, we have Queen Regents. These are queens who are ruling in the name of someone else when they are unable to. So this could have happened if a child had inherited the throne at a very young age, and their legal power is given to the regent to rule in their name until they come of age. Regents could also be wives of the king, who may take over the power in the name of the king when he cannot rule. For example, this occurred with Henry VIII in two situations where he was busy fighting in France. This was with Queen Catherine of Aragon and Queen Catherine Parr. And lastly, we have Queen Regnants. These are queens who are ruling in their own right. They've inherited the throne themselves, and this typically means that they were the daughters of a previous king. And in fact, this was the case for all of our queens, but Victoria, who inherited the throne from her uncle. We have 6 officially crowned Queen Regnants, and I'll come back to the official comment later, but officially we've only had 6 crowned queens over the period of 1,500 years. So why was this exactly? It was only in 2013 that a new law on the succession of female heirs was passed. This meant that a woman would not be passed over in favour of a man. So in every instance prior to 2013, a male heir was above a female in succession. So we don't have many females succeeding to the throne, except for a few times in very particular circumstances. And to be clear, there were no laws against female rulers, but they were less likely to be the only heir left to succeed to the throne. Now, this video would be far too long if I discussed all of these queens, so I'll just be touching on the first few. In the last video, I asked who was the first king of England, which remains a complex debate, but what about the first queen? Now, surprisingly, this is also an interesting question to answer. So we have the 6 officially crowned Queen Regnants, but we have 8 queens in total. These extra 2 queens ruled for a smaller period of time, but they were never actually officially crowned as queens. Their disputed reign often means that they are discounted, but their story is just as important to discuss when talking about queens and how they came into power and out of power. First up, we have Queen Matilda. In 1120, William, King Henry I's only legitimate son, was returning to England from Normandy when his ship hit a submerged rock, capsized and sank. William, the heir to the throne, drowned. This left Henry I with only one legitimate child, his daughter Matilda. King Henry I of England got his nobles to swear recognition to Matilda as his heir, but once Henry died, people weren't exactly keen on Matilda taking the throne. At this point, remember, a woman ruling alone had never been done in England. Henry I's nephew Stephen was his closest male heir, who very quickly took it upon himself to claim the title. The nobles, who had promised to be loyal to Matilda, instead crowned Stephen King of England. Now, Matilda did not give up her claim to the throne easily, and she did have some remaining loyal nobles on her side. She continued to fight for the crown, which became a long civil war known as the Anarchy between 1135 and 1153, in the hopes to get back her rightful crown. Matilda did succeed against Stephen and ruled for several months during 1141, but this was a short-lived victory, as she was overthrown again. She was never officially crowned, and this is why some do not count her as the first Queen of England, as this was a disputed rule. Eventually, Stephen and Matilda negotiated peace, in which Stephen recognised her son Henry as his heir. When Stephen died in 1154, Henry ascended the throne as King Henry II. So although Matilda was the rightful heir to the throne, she gave it up so that her son could eventually succeed in her place. She also probably knew people would more readily accept a new king than accept her rule. Next on the unofficial Queen's list is Lady Jane Grey, whose story begins in the mid-16th century. That's right, we went 400 years without any more female rulers. No wonder they were called the Dark Ages. Jane Grey is a very small character in the soap opera of the Tudor household, but hers is an especially sad story. She was the niece of King Henry VIII, so why did she succeed to the throne? Well, Edward VI was Henry's one and only son, and he became king at a young age of 9. Edward fell chronically ill at 15, and so his reign was quite short. And he was England's first Protestant monarch, and wanted to keep the religion of the royal family Protestant. And so he chose a Protestant successor, excluding his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth due to their illegitimacy. This left 16-year-old Jane Grey as Edward's successor. However, many did not support passing over Mary as heir, especially Mary herself. After Edward's death, Jane became queen, and she was taken to the Tower of London to await her coronation, a coronation that never happened. Mary wasn't going to give up her crown, and as Mary's supporters grew, the Privy Council of England proclaimed Mary as queen just 9 days later, deposing Jane as queen, hence her famous title, the 9-Day Queen. Jane was held prisoner in the Tower and was convicted in November of high treason, and was executed in February of 1554 under suspicions of further plots to kick Mary out again. So she went into the Tower in July being told she was now queen, and left more than 6 months later to her own execution. Those are the 2 queens who were never crowned, and so often gets missed in a lot of royalty lists and features. This brings us to Queen Mary I. As you'll remember, Mary was Henry VIII's first child, who was claimed illegitimate after he divorced from her mother, Catherine of Aragon. After she won the support of the public and nobles, Mary was able to take back the throne after claiming her right through her father, despite the divorce. She was crowned officially as Queen of England, and this is what makes her the first official Queen Regnant. Mary married Prince Philip of Spain just a year into her rule, no doubt pressured into securing a marriage alliance. And for the first time in English history, the crowned ruler was a female, and the spouse of the monarch was male. So what did they do with Philip? Well, the government actually wrote in terms the Act for the marriage of Queen Mary to Philip of Spain that Philip was basically the king, sharing rule with Mary for as long as the marriage would last. He would enjoy Mary's titles and honours. All official documents were to have both their names. Parliament was to be called under their joint authority. Crowns were also made with the heads of both Mary and Philip. The Great Seal and the coat of arms of England also showed their joint reign. Philip was to co-reign with his wife, something any previous Queen Consort never did with their husbands. But England's first crowned queen certainly wasn't treated like any other king. This is never really highlighted in many royal histories, and I don't want to downplay Mary's reign, but it was quite interesting that the first crowned queen wasn't really given full and sole rights of her own title. Together they had no children, and so after Mary became ill and died, the throne was passed down once more through the Tudor line. And so we reach the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth was Mary's half-sister, Henry VIII's daughter from his marriage to Anne Boleyn, and was also claimed illegitimate after he remarried once, twice, and another 4 times after that. She was held in the Tower of London for most of Mary's reign, as Mary feared her attempts to take the throne forcefully. But finally she was given the crown peacefully after recognition of her legitimacy as the only Tudor heir to the throne. Elizabeth famously became the Virgin Queen, creating quite a different legacy from her sister. She was heavily pushed by her Privy Council to get married, but despite many suitors and marriage propositions, she remained stout in her ability to rule alone, famously saying that she was married to her country. Elizabeth ruled for 44 years, the longest rule so far by any of the previous queens, and her rule is described as a time of prosperity and glory, establishing a national identity. Elizabeth had no children either, and so after 3 queens in succession, the Tudor line ended here, and we didn't see another Queen Regnant for a whole other century. So here we have the first 4 women ruling over England: Matilda, Jane, Mary and Elizabeth. 2 were never officially crowned. Mary had to share her title and power with her husband, and it was only when we get to Elizabeth that we see the first sole female ruler. Obviously, I couldn't cover their entire lives and stories in this short chat, so if you have any more facts and tidbits I may have missed, feel free to share them in the comments. You'll find most of my sources in the description below, a couple books and a couple web pages that I'd highly suggest taking a look at if you're interested. And thanks for watching once again, and goodbye for now.